Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to a channel first. This is the first Kiwi watch, the first watch from New Zealand that I have ever reviewed on the channel. Sweet as brew. Now I'm not suggesting the watch was made in New Zealand, I'm sure it came out of a factory in Asia somewhere, but both brand and brand owner, both definitely from New Zealand. It's the Beaufort Cavalli, it's the follow-up to their Aero Timer, the model that launched the brand a couple of years ago. This one going live on Kickstarter in just over a day's time. I will obviously leave links in the description of the video, either to the brand website or to the campaign, depending on timing. So what does a Kiwi watch look like then? Well, it looks a lot like a 1950s, 1960s retro dive watch to me. Think Yema Navigraph or Rado Captain Cook and you are definitely on the right lines. Now you saw the pop-up, I'm sure. This video is sponsored by Beaufort. Thank you, Beaufort. If you're keen on one of these, don't just take my word for it. There are at least 3 other YouTube reviews available, including one by my man Ivan over at Perth Watch, so be sure to check that out. I do have a couple of moans and niggles towards the back end of the review with this one, but overall, I think it's a nice little watch for the money. What is the money? Well, get your calculators out for this one, folks. These are going to be 799 New Zealand dollars RRP. What's a New Zealand dollar worth? Plus there's a 35% early bird special for the Kickstarter campaign. That works out at 375 USD. I think that's pretty competitive for a Swiss automatic, fully decorated, fully regulated movement, box dome sapphire crystal and a sapphire bezel insert amongst other things. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. And we will start by having a look at the box, which clearly belongs to the Aero Timer, the previous model. I'm guessing therefore you can expect something like this, a small, rather nondescript black cardboard box. The watch, however, is far more interesting than the packaging, thankfully. So I mentioned the Rado Captain Cook and the Yema Navigraph. I think you can throw in the Seamaster 300 Laurier Neptune Baltic Aquascape. You get the idea. That is the water that this one is swimming in metaphorically anyway. That vintage, retro 50s, late 50s, early 1960s, a number of design cues that all of those watches share really. If you're referencing this one against the Rado Captain Cook though, because of that handset, I think you need to be referencing it against the smaller 37 rather than the larger 42, because it may have a 39mm diameter dimension, but the case is actually a bit slimmer than that. It measures, on my calipers anyway, at 37.5mm, so definitely wears like the smaller of the two Rados. A couple of other dimensions though change that equation a little bit. 13.8mm thick, so it's got a bit of chunk to it, and a 48mm lug to lug. Now, being like the Navigraph, the Oleg and Weiss P101, all of these watches really have very, very straight cases. Not a lot of curvature there at all, so they tend to wear a bit larger. So it looks small, but it actually wears a bit larger than that diameter dimension suggests. 20mm lug width, a fair degree of taper down to 16, back up to 17.5 at the clasp. Sized up for me, I had to remove 3 links. I've got a 7-inch wrist, so if you have much more than an 8-inch wrist, you might struggle to get this one to fit you. It weighs in at 134 grams, which is pretty much what you'd expect, given those slightly more compact set of dimensions. So all stainless steel construction, they describe it as a classic 3-piece case. So stainless steel mid case, stainless steel bezel, crown, and screw-on stainless steel case back. 200 meters of water resistance. The crown is obviously screwed down as well. Now, bracelet. Not only have they given us drilled lug ends, they have also given us quick release bracelets. So if you are a bit of a strap fiend, if you've got a collection of retro style 20s, I'll show you on some Horween later on, I think you'll have no problem swapping this one back and forth. 3-link oyster style, however, rather unusually, all of those links are individually articulated. More on that later. The clasp here has the Beaufort name etched into the upper surface. We do have high polished chamfered edge, twin triggers, 4 holes of micro adjust, and a nice bit of perlage on that milled clasp. The perlage matching the perlage on the fully decorated STP 111. So you've had a look at the case profile, now let's have a look at the case finishing. High polish on the side here, Brushed upper surface to those lugs matching the brush upper surface to the end links. There is a little transition that broadens towards the lug end, towards the lug hole there. That is also in high polish. Unguarded vintage style crown, as is the way of all of the watches that I mentioned earlier on as references, and there is a nice little symbol. I can't see that replicated elsewhere on the watch or elsewhere on the Beaufort website. Perhaps it has some relevance, but if it does, I'm not sure about it. Bezel on this one, 120 click unidirectional rotating dive time. Notice a difference in pitch as it goes around there. Seems to get a little bit higher as it heads towards the 12 o'clock, but everything does line up nicely. Now, box dome sapphire crystal, that type of sapphire is not cheap, and we have a matching sapphire bezel insert. I reckon I've only seen maybe 6 or 7 sapphire bezel inserts certainly floating around this price. It is a bit of a rarity, but always welcome. Always plays very nicely off a crystal, especially a crystal as good as that one, and as you can see there is a little bit of blue anti-reflective undercoating playing nicely with my studio lights. Let's have a look at the case back and the movement, and as you can see there, those quick release spring bars on the bracelet that I mentioned earlier on. I did say fully regulated, fully decorated. That means it is an STP 111, a Swiss Technology Products 111, yet another clone of the ETA 2824. This one, 26 jewel hacking and hand winding. Now, STP regulate these to 5 positions when they leave the factory with a stated tolerance of plus or minus 5 seconds per day. So, with the decoration, if you take the regulation and the decoration into account, it's the equivalent of jumping up a couple of notches on the ladder if you're going to compare it directly to either the SW200 or the ETA 2824. I made a bold prediction at the end of last year that these were going to be everywhere in 2020 because ETA were restricting supply again. This is the first one I've seen, so that is one prediction that just has not come true. Let's get this one on a time grapher to see how well they've regulated it. Yeah, that's not so bad, is it? Pretty steady set of numbers. Beat error is a little high, but this is a prototype. It's been round the world a couple of times already. That looks like one healthy movement. STP doesn't quite have the cachet or the reputation of Solita or ETA, but they do compensate by decorating and by regulating. Let's have a look at the dial then. I must say, I think the dial is very attractive. I think they have really got that vintage aesthetic right with this one. Again, when I take it outside, you can see the blue anti-reflective undercoating just reflecting on that box dome sapphire crystal. A bit of sheen from the sapphire bezel insert as well. It's a mixture of applied and printed. The Beaufort name and Cavalli name. Cavalli, by the way, a series of islands in New Zealand, a kind of popular dive spot, hence the dive watch reference. Printed above the pinion, and automatic water resistance 200 meters printed below the pinion. We have a color match date wheel, which is always nice to see, especially on a more unusual movement. Black against a kind of green fume dial. So the dial is both fade dial and texture, which I think is a nice, interesting effect. Neither of them, though, are over the top. It's not too extreme a fade, and it is not too extreme in terms of the texturing either. There's an angled chapter ring with Arabics at the 5s and minute markers and 1/5 of a minute markers there printed on as well. The handset, yeah, definitely a bit of Rado Captain Cook Seamaster 300 there, that's for sure. It's got that arrowhead hour hand, pencil minute hand, and a really interesting diamond tipped second hand with no counterbalance. Quite unusual there. That second hand pushes all the way out to the edge of the minute track as well. All of the indices, whether they're the Arabics or the little arrowheads, all have a slight high polish silver surround, just picking up the high polish of the handset and the date frame at 6. Overall, I like it. I think there's always a danger of going over the top, trying to go too retro if you're going for that 50s, 60s look. I don't think Beaufort have done that. I think they've got this one pretty much spot on. So that's it on wrist. It looks good, but how does it wear? Does it wear like a small watch or does it wear like a big watch? Well, I think it wears somewhere in between. Compact diameter and that big vintage taper all the way down to 15.5 at the bracelet class there, which I do like visually, means it wears a little smaller. But then again, 14mm thick and a relatively large for its diameter, lug to lug of 48 means it wears quite big, and also no curvature there really. It's got one of those flat vintage style cases, so somewhere in between. I guess therefore that means you're going to have a fairly narrow band of operation in terms of wrist sizes for this one. If your wrist is much smaller than mine, you're going to get a bit of overhang. There's a danger there's going to be a bit of overhang. If your wrist is much bigger than mine, there's a danger it's just going to look a little bit too small for you. So I would say 6.5 to 7.5 inch wrists. That's the sweet spot for this one. That's the overhead. You do get some flecto because of the sapphire and sapphire combination, but still nicely legible. This one's in green, there's a blue fume, there's a brown, there's a black. There's also a couple of black dial versions with a GMT bezel. If you think that's going to be useful for you, that is also an option. Outside natural light, the blue anti-reflective and that double sapphire combination comes to the fore again. Like I said, I think they got the looks of this one just about spot on. It's a handsome little watch. On wrist, have a look at the bracelet. Have a look at how it wears on me. I will talk a bit more about the bracelet in just a second or two. If I show you it down the wrist, again, you can see what I mean by that fairly rigid, flat case profile. Pocket shot to finish. This style of watch, slightly smaller, slightly lighter. I would tend to wear loose. I would tend to wear it below the knuckle. But obviously, you can do what you like with it. But what are those moans and niggles that I alluded to in the introduction? Well, I have one moan and 3 niggles, and I'll start with the moan. The moan is the early bird specials, 35% off, are only available for the first hour of the Kickstarter campaign. Now, I always say if you're keen on the discounts, then sign up, set an alarm, whatever. I know margins are tight and Kickstarter does take a chunk off the top, but that seems a little bit tight if you ask me. I know Kiwis are as fiscally prudent as us Scots, but surely they could have extended that discount. For the first 24 hours, it's not the end of the world, it just drops back to 30%, but yeah, an hour seems a little bit arbitrary if I'm being honest. Niggle number 1, the crown is a little bit too small in my reckoning. I think they could easily have added a mil to that and it wouldn't have looked disproportionate to the case. As it is, it's a bit small, it's a bit fiddly, it's just not all that pleasant to use. Could definitely have done with a bit of upsizing. Niggle 2, I haven't shown you the loom video, which is usually a good sign that I'm going to complain about it. BGW9, plenty of it on that sapphire bezel insert, plenty of it on the hands as well. Not so much of it on the indices. If I turn the speed up, once you get to about 5 minutes, the indices have effectively gone. Impressive result from the hands and the sapphire bezel though. Sapphire bezels usually are the first thing to go. For production units, I reckon they could easily apply a few more layers to those indices. Niggle number 3 involves the bracelet I did mention earlier on, oyster style. All 3 links fully articulated. Now what that means is when the watch is on your wrist, you get the maximum opportunity for the bracelet to conform to your wrist, therefore you get the maximum amount of comfort. However, the upper edge, the upper surface, always looks a little bit awkward. You can see they're far more rectangular, they're not particularly rounded off. That means you get these little edges that stick up when it is on your wrist. Not the first time I've seen it. I think the Richard Legrand Odyssey Mark III had a similar bracelet. Once these links get to a certain size and you choose to articulate them, this is inevitable. I think they should have another look at this one. Maybe have another look at the pin placement, see if they could do it a bit neater for production units as well. And that's it on some vintage style cross-stitch Horween. As promised, this little thing could be a total strap monster if you do have a collection of similarly styled 20mm lug wedge straps. A few minor gripes with this one, but nothing major. I think the head of the watch is still very nicely done, very, very attractive. And at less than $400, if I'm talking about the Rado Captain Cook as a reference, it's less than a quarter of the price of the Rado Captain Cook. So certainly good value for money, definitely one worth considering. So there you have it, the Beaufort Cavalli coming to Kickstarter at some point over the next 48 hours or so. Couple of moans and niggles notwithstanding, I think this is a pretty decent little specimen for the money. Do bear in mind though, if you go for one of these late 50s, early 1960s retro dive watches, they very much wear like they did back then, i.e. very flat. So it's a small watch, but it doesn't really wear like a small watch. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in a future video.